Today, we're diving into a really important case from the Supreme Court of India, all the way back in 1995. Now, this is a story about fairness, it's about justice, and it's about how one single legal challenge completely changed the game for educational funding. So, let's get right into it. Look, I'm not going to make you wait till the end for the big reveal. The final verdict was a knockout. The Supreme Court declared that the government of Maharashtra's policy of not funding private law colleges was, plain and simple, discriminatory. This wasn't just some minor disagreement, you guys. This was a major showdown with huge implications for the future. So that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, on the surface, it just looks like a budget decision, right? A government deciding where to spend its money. But as we're about to see, this case went way deeper, touching on some of the most fundamental rights and duties in the Indian Constitution. Okay, so to really get why the court ruled the way it did, we need to rewind a little. We have to look at the situation on the ground that sparked this whole legal firestorm in the first place. And wow, this chart says it all, doesn't it? The picture is pretty stark. The state of Maharashtra was giving financial aid, grants, to private colleges for degrees like medicine and engineering, but when you got to law colleges, nothing. A big, fat zero. They were just completely left out in the cold, and there was no good reason given for it. Just so we're all on the same page, when we say grants and aid, what are we talking about? Well, it's basically money the government provides to help schools and colleges keep the lights on, operate effectively, and, maintain high standards of education. So by denying this to law colleges, the state was essentially saying the quality of legal education just wasn't a priority. A fight like this needs a champion, and this one had one. The whole challenge was spearheaded by Mr. MP Vashi. He was a practicing lawyer, a member of the Bar Council, and he saw this glaring inequality and decided someone had to do something about it, so he took the state to court. So with this obviously unfair system in place, the stage was set for a massive legal argument. And the people challenging this policy, they didn't just argue it was unfair, they argued it was flat out unconstitutional. Their entire case was built on a couple of really powerful pillars from the Constitution. And the first one, well, it's a big one. It's one of the most important articles in the whole document, Article 2.1. Now, on paper, Article 21 guarantees the right to life and personal liberty. But the Supreme Court has said for a long time that this isn't just about breathing. It's about the right to live with human dignity. And the argument here was brilliant. How can you have a dignified life without access to justice? And how can you possibly have access to justice without a system that produces well-trained lawyers? You see the link? Suddenly, legal education becomes a key part of this fundamental right. But they didn't stop there. To make their case even stronger, they brought in a second constitutional heavy hitter to back up their main argument, Article 39A. Think about it this way. Article 39A basically tells the state, hey, you have a duty to make sure everyone has equal access to justice, and you need to provide free legal aid for people who can't afford a lawyer. Okay, great, but how is the state supposed to do that? You can't just wish free legal aid into existence. You need a constant supply of competent lawyers coming out of good law schools. The two are completely connected. And it's probably a good idea to quickly explain what these directive principles are. They're not laws that you can sue the government for breaking. Instead, think of them as the Constitution's moral compass. They are the fundamental guidelines for how the country should be governed, and courts use them all the time to interpret laws and judge the government's actions. All right, so the stage is set. We've got these powerful constitutional arguments on the table. So how did the Supreme Court connect all these dots to arrive at its landmark decision? The court's logic was just crystal clear. They drew a straight, unbreakable line. To provide free legal aid like the Constitution says you must, you need lawyers. To have good lawyers, you need quality legal education. And to have quality education, schools need financial support. So by cutting off the funding, the state was actually sabotaging the very foundation of the justice system it was supposed to uphold. So what was the government's excuse for all this? What could they possibly say to defend this policy? Well, they used a classic, one you've probably heard before, a paucity of funds. Basically, sorry, we're broke, we just don't have enough money to go around. Yeah, the Supreme Court was not buying that. Not for a second. In a really powerful statement, the judges declared that a lack of money can never be an excuse for discrimination. If you have enough money to fund medical and engineering colleges, you can't just decide to leave law colleges out. It just doesn't work that way. And the court wasn't done. It also took the state to task for just not doing its job. The judges pointed out that the government knew perfectly well that the demand for legal education was growing, but it had done nothing to support it. This wasn't just some accident, it was a clear neglect of its constitutional duties. So the law colleges won, a huge victory. But what happened next? What's the lasting impact? Let's take a look at why we're still talking about this case all these years later. The final judgment came down in 1995, and that year really became a landmark for educational rights in India. The Supreme Court ordered the state of Maharashtra to immediately start giving these grants to private law colleges, ending the discrimination for good. And the decision sent these massive ripples across the country. First, it cemented the government's obligation to support legal education. It also set a super strong precedent that governments couldn't just pick and choose who gets funding without a good reason. It also, by default, strengthened the whole system for providing free legal aid. And maybe most importantly, it empowered other schools and institutions to stand up and demand fair treatment. When you really step back and look at the big picture, this case is about so much more than college funding. It's a perfect example of the judiciary playing its vital role as a check on government power, making sure that every single action, even a budget line item, lines up with the Constitution's most important principles: equality and justice for all. It's an incredible story of how one person challenging one unfair policy created a legacy that lasts to this day. And it kind of leaves you with a big question to think about, doesn't it?